August 6, 1945, Hiroshima, Japan. 8:15 in the morning. The sky was clear, blindingly, deceptively clear, the kind of sky that makes you believe nothing bad could ever fall from above. Tsutomu Yamaguchi stood near the Mitsubishi shipyard, briefcase in hand, ready to wrap up 3 days of business and go home. He was 32 years old. He had a wife. He had a son. He had a train ticket back to Nagasaki folded in his pocket. Then the world turned white. Not orange. Not red. White. A wall of pure, silent light swallowed everything, every building, every street, every sound, before the heat and the blast wave arrived like the fist of God. In a single second, the most powerful weapon ever used against human beings erased 16 square kilometers of a living city. And Tsutomu Yamaguchi, standing less than 3 kilometers from the hypocenter, was still breathing. That alone should have been the end of his story. It was only the beginning. If this kind of history reaches into your bones and refuses to let go, hit that like button right now and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment below. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. People from over 40 countries tune in to this channel. Let's see if we can add yours to the list today. To understand what Yamaguchi survived, you have to understand what Hiroshima was in August of 1945. It was not simply a city. It was a machine of war. Home to the Second Army headquarters, tens of thousands of military personnel, and hundreds of thousands of civilians who had no idea what was coming. The city sat in a flat river delta. The surrounding hills would bounce and amplify the blast wave like a bowl holding thunder. By military logic, it was the perfect target. Japan in the summer of 1945 was a nation burning at both ends. The United States had already firebombed 67 Japanese cities. Tokyo alone had lost over 100,000 civilians in a single night in March. The B-29 superfortress flew at altitudes Japanese guns could barely reach, dropping incendiary payloads that turned wooden cities into furnaces. Japan had no meaningful air defense left. Its navy was shattered, its fuel nearly gone. But surrender? That word did not exist in the imperial vocabulary. The Japanese military government had begun training civilians, women, elderly men, children, to charge American invaders with sharpened bamboo spears. The planned Allied invasion of the home islands was projected to cost up to 1 million Allied casualties. American commanders dreaded it. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was not a soldier in the traditional sense. He was a naval engineer designing oil tankers for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. He had been sent to Hiroshima on a routine 3-day assignment. He should have left the evening of August 5th. Paperwork delayed him. A small bureaucratic inconvenience. The kind you forget about by dinner. He never forgot about it again. The morning of August the 6th, Yamaguchi was walking to the shipyard when he noticed a single B-29 flying high overhead. Not unusual. American reconnaissance planes had flown over Japanese cities for months. People barely looked up anymore. Then he saw 2 small objects fall from the aircraft. One was a parachute carrying instruments. The other was a bomb. It measured 10 feet long. It weighed 9,700 pounds. Its name was Little Boy. Its yield was approximately 15 kilotons of TNT. It detonated 600 meters above the Shima Surgical Clinic, precisely 1.9 kilometers from where Yamaguchi stood. He dove into a ditch. The flash came first. That pure white silence survivors described as a second sun. Light so intense it left shadows burned into walls, the outlines of human beings scorched permanently into stone. The temperature at ground zero exceeded 4,000 degrees Celsius. The blast wave hit Yamaguchi at nearly the speed of sound. It hurled him through the air. It ruptured his eardrums. It burned his arms and the left side of his face. It threw him into a potato field where he lay unconscious while the city ceased to exist around him. Over 70,000 people died in that single moment. Another 70,000 would follow from burns and radiation in the weeks ahead. And somewhere in that ash, Yamaguchi opened his eyes. The silence after Hiroshima was not peaceful. It was the silence of erasure. Yamaguchi pulled himself from the ground with his face burning and his hearing gone. The city he had walked through that morning no longer existed. What remained was a flat, smoking plain. The rivers ran dark with ash and blood. People stumbled through the haze with their skin hanging from their arms like wet cloth. He found his two colleagues alive. Somehow, improbably alive. Over the next 2 days, Yamaguchi received basic treatment for his burns. His face and arms were wrapped. His hearing slowly, partially returned. He was alive, mobile, and thinking, which put him in a rare category among the survivors of Hiroshima. He decided to go home. His wife and child were in Nagasaki. Every injured man moves toward home. Every burned man thinks of the people who love him. He boarded a train on August 8th and watched the undamaged countryside roll past the window. He thought about what he had seen. He thought about whether he had the words to describe it. He arrived in Nagasaki that evening and held his family. He had survived the first atomic bomb ever dropped in warfare. He was home. He was safe. He had 36 hours to believe that. The decision to bomb Nagasaki was not made lightly, but it was made quickly. Japan had not surrendered after Hiroshima. The military government received the news and interpreted it cautiously. Some commanders believed the Americans had only one such device. The Supreme Council for the direction of the war was deadlocked. The Emperor had not yet spoken. Washington had its own pressures. The Manhattan Project had cost $2 billion and employed 130,000 people across multiple secret sites. 2 weapons existed. The plan called for using both in rapid succession to suggest America had an unlimited supply. The second bomb was called Fat Man, a plutonium implosion device, rounder and more powerful than Little Boy. Its intended target was Kokura. Weather changed history. On the morning of August 9th, clouds hung over Kokura like a curtain drawn shut. The bombardier in the B-29 Boxcar could not confirm a visual target. They circled 3 times. 3 full circuits above a city of people who would never know how close they came. Anti-aircraft fire began rising. A Japanese fighter appeared on radar. Boxcar turned southwest toward the secondary target. Nagasaki's Tsutomu Yamaguchi did not know any of this. He was sitting inside the Mitsubishi Nagasaki headquarters on the morning of August 9th, bandaged and exhausted, reporting to his supervisor about what he had witnessed 3 days earlier. His supervisor was skeptical. One bomb destroying an entire city? Impossible. Surely the reports were exaggerated. Yamaguchi described the single flash of white light. At 11:02 a.m., that same white light appeared outside the window. Fat Man detonated 503 meters above the Urakami district of Nagasaki. Its yield was approximately 21 kilotons, more powerful than Little Boy. The hypocenter sat roughly 3 kilometers from where Yamaguchi sat inside the Mitsubishi building. The same man, the same white light, the same wall of fire. But this time he knew what it was before his mind could finish the thought. He dove under the desk. The building shuddered. Glass exploded inward. The walls cracked and buckled but held. The blast wave tore through the valley. Smoke rose in that terrible column, 18 kilometers into the sky, before spreading into the shape the world would never forget. Between 40,000 and 80,000 people died in Nagasaki. The Urakami Cathedral, one of the largest Catholic churches in Asia, collapsed into rubble during morning mass. Entire neighborhoods in the valley were incinerated in seconds. And inside a shaking building, Tsutomu Yamaguchi crawled out from under his desk. The fires were familiar. The screaming was familiar. The smell of burning, that particular, indescribable smell, was familiar. He had been here before. 3 days ago, and 300 kilometers away, he had been here before. His wife and son were in a different part of the city. When the blast hit, his wife had been standing in a ration line. The fireball scorched her arms and face. His infant son had his clothing burned from his body. They survived. All 3 of them survived. A family twice kissed by catastrophe, still breathing on the other side. In the mathematical logic of atomic warfare, that should have been impossible. In Hiroshima, roughly 30% of those within 1.5 kilometers of the hypocenter survived the initial blast. Most died within days from burns and radiation. Yamaguchi was within 2 kilometers. He took full burn exposure. He inhaled ionized air. In Nagasaki, he was within 3 kilometers of a more powerful device. He survived both. Radiation sickness came afterward, hair loss, fever, a weakness that settled into his bones like cold water. The burns on his arms required treatment for years. He lost the hearing in his left ear permanently, but he lived. Japan moved toward surrender rapidly after August 9th. The Soviet Union had declared war on Japan the day before and launched a massive offensive into Manchuria. Over 1.5 million Soviet troops swept through Japanese defensive lines with devastating speed. The Kwantung Army, once the pride of the imperial military, collapsed within days. Any hope of Soviet mediation for a negotiated peace vanished overnight. Emperor Hirohito made the decision. On August 15, 1945, he recorded a radio address, the first time ordinary Japanese citizens had ever heard their emperor's voice. He spoke of a new and most cruel bomb. He spoke of enduring the unendurable. And in that careful imperial phrasing, he announced the end of a war that had consumed over 70 million lives. Yamaguchi was somewhere in a burned city when those words came across the radio. He had stood inside 2 atomic detonations and survived both. He heard the emperor's voice. He heard the word Japan had never officially spoken until that moment. Surrender. Decades passed. Tsutomu Yamaguchi did not speak publicly for a long time. The hibakusha, the atomic bomb survivors, carried a particular weight in post-war Japan. Some employers refused to hire them, fearing contamination. Some families pressured their children not to marry hibakusha. The survivors of the worst weapon in human history were, in some corners, treated as liabilities. Yamaguchi rebuilt his life quietly. He returned to engineering. He raised his family. He carried his memories of 2 white lights with the stoic dignity that defined his generation. But as he aged, the weight of silence grew heavier than the weight of speaking. He began to give testimony. First locally, then nationally, then internationally. He brought his singed engineering blueprints, partially scorched at their edges, as physical proof of where he had stood. He showed them to school children. He showed them to parliamentarians. He showed them to anyone who would listen. In 2009, at age 93, the Japanese government officially recognized Yamaguchi as a Niju Hibakusha, a double atomic bomb survivor. He had applied decades earlier. The paperwork had taken that long. Roughly 165 survivors were known to have experienced both bombings. Most died without formal acknowledgement. Yamaguchi became their voice, their symbol, their witness. He described the atomic bomb with a clarity no historical document could match. He said the heat was like standing inside the sun. He said the silence after the blast was more frightening than the sound. He said he survived not because he was special or lucky, but because fate made a mistake twice and he happened to be the result. He was not bitter. He channeled his experience into advocacy for nuclear disarmament. He spoke at the United Nations. He met with world leaders. He testified before Japan's parliament. He wanted the weapon abolished, not controlled, not limited, abolished. He believed that any human being who had stood inside 2 atomic detonations had earned that opinion without argument. He died on January 4, 2010. He was 93 years old. The story of Tsutomu Yamaguchi refuses to be reduced to a statistic. That is the point. The Manhattan Project produced 3 functional devices. 2 were dropped on civilian cities within 3 days of each other. The combined death toll exceeded 200,000 people before the end of 1945. Radiation effects continued killing for decades. The debates over whether the bombings were necessary, whether alternatives existed, whether the targets were chosen for military or psychological effect, remained serious and unresolved. But Yamaguchi was not a debate. He was a man who went to Hiroshima on business and survived history's first nuclear attack, who boarded a train with burned arms and broken eardrums and went home to his family, who sat in a meeting 3 days later and tried to explain the inexplicable, and who watched for the second time as the sky turned white. Near the end of his life, he said the 2 bombs had stolen something from the Japanese people that no reconstruction could replace. He was not speaking of buildings or infrastructure. He was speaking of the sound of a city in the morning, The trams running, the vendors calling, the school children walking to class. The ordinary percussion of civilian life you never notice until the moment it stops forever. He had heard both cities fall silent. He carried that absence for 65 years. The weapons that exist today are not 15 kilotons. They are measured in megatons, 1,000 times more powerful, thousands of them, scattered across a dozen nations, pointed at every corner of the earth. Tsutomu Yamaguchi survived 2 of the smallest nuclear weapons ever used in warfare. He spent the rest of his life asking a single question: what happens next time? He did not ask it with despair. He asked it with the directness of a man who had seen the answer written in fire and ash, twice, with his own eyes. He asked it because he believed the answer could still be changed. He was a naval engineer. He dealt in blueprints and measurements and the cold precision of structural design. He understood that a ship is only as strong as its weakest seam. And he understood, with a clarity that cost him everything, that civilization is exactly the same. The sky over Hiroshima was clear that morning. 2 cities, 2 bombs, 1 man. Some survivors fade into history, some become the history itself. Tsutomu Yamaguchi stood inside both suns, and he chose to speak. That is the most human thing that has ever happened.